economic zone, 200 nautical mile. Okay? Kaya lang, kung mapapansin nyo sa mapa, pwede ba natin gawin yon? Of course, if we do that, there will be an overlapping claim. Right? Pagdating mo sa 200 nautical miles mo, nandun ka na sa Brunei. Pagdating mo sa 200 nautical miles mo, nandun ka na sa Indonesia. Right? So it's so difficult really to delineate your baseline precisely because there's an overlapping claim. Right? Now, so these are basically the basis of our claim towards the KIG, or the Kalayaan Island Group. Let's move on to the next slide, please. How about for the Scarborough Shoal, or tinatawag natin itong Panatag Shoal? But for Zambales, they call it the Bajo de Masinloc and the Rectobank. So primarily, this is based on the fact that it is an extension of the province of Zambales and part of its EEZ, the Exclusive Economic Zone. So our claim, and the Philippine government is saying that the Scarborough Shoal, the Panatag Shoal, or the Bajo de Masinloc form parts of the Philippine territory precisely because it is well within the 200 nautical mile EEZ. As for the Rectobank, the Philippines exercised jurisdiction in the Rectobank when President Marcos allowed the exploration and drilling of oil in Rectobank. Ngayon, pakinggan natin, ano yung sinasabi ng China? Okay. China says that they basically have the right, based under the historic title, under the customary international law. When you talk about international law, there are so many sources of international law, one of which is customary international law. These are not unwritten laws, okay? But these are customary laws which has been subsequently formed parts in the international law. Now, numerous Chinese publications denote that the South China Sea in its entirety belonged to China ever since the Han Dynasty. So matagal na, sabi nila, ever since the Han Dynasty, sa amin na yan eh. Okay? And they're saying that during the Song Dynasty, Chinese sailors claimed the islands and wrote chronicles about their travels. And the South China Sea was recognized during the Qing Dynasty, wherein cartographers described the location of the island. And apart from that, there are archaeological evidences supporting the claim of China when pottery and coins were found in the different islands of the South China Sea, which dates back to 1755. But of course, it faced and it met a lot of suspicion. Sabi ni China, sa amin ang South China Sea because sa amin na yan sa panahon pa ng Han Dynasty. That's basically one advantage for them. Why? Because China is a literal state. What I mean to say, they are a writing state. Ever since they have been writing their history. Tayo wala eh. Diba? Yung mga ninuno natin, hindi sila marunong magsulat eh. So they were not able to come up with chronicles, journals, or some sort of like that. Because they were not literal as compared to China. In fact, we borrowed our history from Chinese. But then again, China is a signatory to UNCLOS, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. And it just so happened that in clause, historic claims are not recognized. But then again, China would like to insist that I have the right over this disputed territory precisely because it's part of our historic claim. Okay? Next slide. In 1911, Dr. Sun Yat-sen, the first president of the Republic of China. The Republic of China refers to what? The Taipei. Taiwan, right? Before, the seat of government belongs to Taipei, but after the revolution, of course, it was transferred to Beijing. Okay. So during the time of Sun Yat-sen, they were saying that these islands has been already part of China. Okay? And they were saying that when the Treaty of Delimitation between China and Vietnam was signed, the treaty basically provided that the islands 5 degrees east will be considered as the dividing line between China and Vietnam, making the Paracels Island part of China. Are we a claimant to the Paracels? No. Only Vietnam, China, Indonesia, but we're not part of the Paracels Island. Okay. Now, any question about the claim of China in the Philippines towards these islands before we move on? Okay. Maybe we could just reserve your question. So I'll be giving you the timeline, okay, of what exactly happened Okay? Nagsimula ang rift ng Philippines at China in 1995 as correctly pointed out by Carla earlier. Why? What happened in 1995 was the mischief reef incident. Right? In 1995, the Philippine government found that China, the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, Southern Command, in Navy of course, were already establishing or building, okay, structures in the mischief reef. Originally, they were saying na itong itinatayo namin is just fishermen's shelter. Okay? Bahay lang ito ng mga fishermen kasi pag nagbabagyo, they could not find time na makabalik sa China, so they have to stay there, the mischief reef. So they're saying that we have to build these structures to protect our fishermen. When the Philippine government protested, sabi ng Chinese government, no, we're not in fact aware of that. Jesus Christ, di ba? I mean to say, that's your military, and you don't know what your military is doing in the South. Okay. So in 1996, it was followed by a minor skirmish involving Chinese and Philippine ships. And in 1997, there was already a tension, precisely because of the presence of Chinese warship near Mischief Reef in the interception of the Philippine Navy of 2 Chinese vessels near Scarborough Shoal. Okay. The following year, the Philippines discovered na yung tinatawag nilang fisherman shelter, concrete na siya, naging bato na siya. So, anong nagawa natin? Wala, di ba? So, please take note of these historical events because later on this will be connected to our discussions on some of the important political documents involving this issue. In 1999, the China have already completed its construction work on Mischief Reef. That means to say may helipad na doon sa Mischief Reef. You know what the Mischief Reef looks like? It's a stone submerged in water. Okay? It's just a stone submerged in water, but they were able to construct a sophisticated structures in that particular area. Now, Chinese ships, what is this? Okay, fired 2 Vietnamese fishing boat from Thanh Hoa province. So, you knew very well that there was already a skirmish, in fact, a major skirmish between Vietnam and China. In 1988, they killed 88 sailors in Vietnam in one of the contested islands in the Arce. In 2009, this is quite controversial because the United States claimed that their USNS Impeccable was harassed by Chinese vessels. So by 2011, this is quite significant. The Chinese frigate Dongguan fired 3 shots at Philippine fishing boats in the vicinity of the Jackson Atoll. In the following March of 2 Chinese patrol boats ordered MV Veritas Voyager to leave and twice maneuvered close in what appeared a threat to rob the Veritas. Okay? And in May 6, a Chinese marine vessel was sighted in Abad Santos Shoal, and in May 19, the AFP claimed that there were 2 Chinese fighter jets flew into the Philippine airspace near Palawan. You see, all the while, we were not so aware of this particular issue. But the issue on the South China Sea, the tension between the Philippines and China started even from the last quarter of 2011. Or we could say even earlier than the first quarter. But this was aggravated in 2012. What happened in 2012? A Hamilton-class cutter bought by the Philippines from the United States, the BRP Gregorio del Pilar, was involved in a standoff with 2 Chinese surveillance vessels in the Scarborough Shoal. If you could remember that, right? That was exactly April 8, when the Philippine Navy monitored 8 Chinese fishing vessels. Because these Chinese fishing vessels were poaching, okay? They were poaching live sharks, giant clams, corals in the water surrounding the Panatag Shoal. So the next day, what the government did was they dispatched the BRP Gregorio del Pilar to apprehend these poachers. When they were about to apprehend, meaning to say, huhulihin na nila, okay, they were stopped by 2 CMS, China Marine Surveillance Vessels. Of course, kahit marine surveillance vessels na yan that is far more sophisticated than our BRP Gregorio del Pilar. So ang ginawa ni BRP Gregorio del Pilar, he stopped. Okay, he was not able to apprehend these poachers. The problem was that China on the very same day sent another CMS, maritime surveillance vessel. So that makes them 3 against 1 BRP Gregorio del Pilar. Okay. The standoff was very intense. In fact, there was a strong commitment, precisely because there was a strong commitment between the two states that they will stand by on their sovereign claim over these disputed territories. Ang problema, sabi ni China, nasosobrahan ka Pilipinas. Ang nandyan vessels is just a maritime surveillance vessels. Ang meron ka is a warship because it's a BRP Gregorio del Pilar. So what China did, they protested and they required the Philippine Navy to pull out the BRP Gregorio del Pilar. Why? Because the BRP Gregorio del Pilar for China is sending a hostile message for them. Because it's a warship, as compared to them, ang nandun sa kanila is just a maritime surveillance vessels. And indeed, we hit to that call. Pinull out natin si BRP Gregorio del Pilar and we send the BRP Pampanga. Of course, nag-iisa lang siya doon against tatlong maritime vessels nila. Okay? Now, ang nangyari on the 3rd week of that particular standoff, that China deployed another maritime surveillance vessels, making them 4. And on top of that 4, there are another 10 patrol boats occupying the territory against the BRP Pampanga. So that was exactly the situation then. There were already negotiations between the Philippines and China to pull out their vessels. And the negotiation was in fact brokered by the United States. So the United States said, okay, fine. Let's settle this once and for all. Magkaroon tayo ng deadline. Kailan nyo ipupull out yung mga vessels nyo? Okay, and they were able to agree to a certain date. And when the day was nearing, the Philippines started to pull out its vessels. The problem was China did not pull out any single vessels in the Pacific. So that was quite problematic, right? China, in fact, for the last 1 decade, China have already manifested a strong commitment of protecting its sovereign right over these disputed territories. And this is, aggravated by the mere fact that Chinese economy are growing. Despite the 1997 Asian financial crisis, China was able to maintain its double-digit growth in its GDP. Okay? That's why a lot of ASEAN countries was bandwagoning towards China in order to benefit from the Chinese growing economy. Okay? Now, naintindihan po natin yung problema. Of course, ang problema is, hindi lang na marami ang barko nila. Ang problema is mas mapera sila. They have the capability of improving their military armaments and equipment as compared to the Philippines. Right? But then again, the Philippine government was not thinking about it. Why? Because we are so democratically committed to a rules-based system through ASEAN so that we would be able to settle the dispute amicably and peaceably. Okay? And in fact, in line with this, there are other important documents which we need to look at so that we will be able to understand the efforts of ASEAN in trying to resolve the issue in the South China Sea. Let's move on to the next one. The TAC, or the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, and the Treaty on the Southeast Asia Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone was concluded in 1976 and 1995 respectively. And these were basically used as the main legal instrument governing the behaviors of the parties in the South China Sea. Remember guys, that even before pa, meron na itong mga disputes in the South China Sea. Okay? But the guiding principles that was used by ASEAN in order to prevent, the escalation of tension was the TAC, the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, and the Southeast Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone. So prior to the signing of the ASEAN Declaration on the South China Sea, these two legal instruments were basically used to govern the behaviors of parties in the parties concerned in the South China Sea. Now, since 1990, as we have mentioned here, since 1990, efforts were made in the region to stabilize the situation and seek opportunities for cooperation in the South China Sea. And these efforts resulted, among others, in the Manila Declaration, which we now call the 1992 ASEAN Declaration on the South China Sea, which was adopted in Manila. That's why we call it the Manila Declaration. Now, itong Manila Declaration, the ASEAN Manila Declaration, was just a principle, okay, on the part of ASEAN. Ang sinasabi lang natin dito, ito ang inidineclare namin na prinsipyo that will govern the behavior of concerned parties in the South China Sea dispute. Okay, it's just a principle declared by ASEAN. Okay, so, but originally guys, sa tinatawag natin ASEAN Declaration of the South China Sea. The ASEAN Declaration of the South China Sea, basically, the original purpose was to have a code of conduct. Okay? Why? Bakit kailangan nga ba ng code of conduct sa South China Sea? Why do you think there's a need to establish a code of conduct in the South China Sea? What do you think would be its purpose? Okay, merely to avoid conflict, right? So the ASEAN foreign ministers recognize that the tension, the issue in the South China Sea is a sensitive question of sovereignty and jurisdiction. Now they're saying that any adverse effect of tension regarding the South China Sea could have a negative effect on the peace and stability in the region. So therefore, the ASEAN created this declaration and they invited other parties. And at that time, Vietnam was not part of ASEAN then. But Vietnam supported the ASEAN declaration and China subsequently signed the declaration. Okay? Sumali na rin si China. Sabi ni China, okay, we subscribe to the principles of the ASEAN declaration on the South China Sea. But the problem was that was in 1992. 3 years after, what happened was what? The mischief did. Right? So it was a sudden change in China's behavior. So the foreign minister of ASEAN then looked at it as a very critical period regarding the tension in the South China Sea. But if you're going to look at history, guys, the idea of the Code of Conduct, please don't be confused on the ASEAN Declaration and Code of Conduct. Wala pa tayo ngayon Code of Conduct. Ang meron tayo is the ASEAN Declaration on the South China Sea, which was signed in 1992 in Manila. Okay? Part of that ASEAN Declaration was the formation of a Code of Conduct. Okay? Now, it was officially endorsed in 1996 ASEAN Ministerial Meeting in Jakarta. Okay? They're saying that we need to have a Code of Conduct so that we'd be able to govern the behavior of the parties concerned in the disputes. However, after 5 long negotiations, they were not able to come up with a Code of Conduct. What they were able to come up was just the ASEAN Declaration on the Conduct of Parties on the South China Sea, or what we call the DOC. Okay? So if you're going, let's move to the next slide, please. So if you're going to look at the text of the ASEAN Declaration of the South China Sea, it is merely a declaration demonstrated ASEAN's concern over the tension between Vietnam and China. Kaya nagkaroon ng declaration because of the tension between Vietnam and China. Hindi pa kasali ang Philippines. Okay? So the declaration called for the exploring of the possibility of cooperation in the South China Sea. So nag-subscribe si China sa ASEAN Declaration in the South China Sea. However, akala natin okay na. Ang nangyari yung 1995 mischief incident. Okay? After that, nagkaroon ng next slide please. Declaration of Conduct on the parties of South China Sea. As I was saying earlier on, the original plan, which was basically put forward by the ASEAN Declaration, was to have a Code of Conduct. But they were not able to have a Code of Conduct because the Chinese would not agree with the conditions being put forward by ASEAN. So after a 5-year-long negotiation, what they came up was a 2002, 10 years after, diba? From 1992, then 10 years after, you have that 2002 Declaration of Conduct of the Parties in the South China Sea. So The DOC, or the Declaration of Conduct, was signed as a step forward towards the adoption of a more binding code of conduct which defines the rights and responsibility of the parties concerned to further promote peace and stability and development in the region. More than that, the Declaration of Conduct includes new concept of no new occupation. Ang sinasabi ng Declaration of Conduct, okay ha, kung ano ang meron tayo, yan na, wala na mag-occupy ng other features of the South China Sea. Okay? Yan ang sinasabi natin sa 2002 Declaration of the Conduct. The problem is, it's a non-binding. It covers mostly soft issues such as maritime scientific research, environmental protection, etc., etc. But basically, it respects freedom of navigation and overflight, which is basically in accordance with the UNCLOS. Okay? Now, the Declaration of the Code of Conduct aims to resolve the dispute through peaceful means without resorting to the threat or use of force. Now, did China subscribe to the DOC? Yes, China subscribed to the 2002 Declaration of Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea. Again, kung ang una ang sinabi natin is the ASEAN Declaration, ito, Declaration of Conduct. That means to say, there are already concrete stipulations as to how they're going to do it. Okay? How they're going to behave. Okay? So, the idea of the COC, as I was said, again, never materialized. Walang nangyaring code of conduct precisely because they would not agree among themselves. Why? Because China would not like to treat the issue internationally. He's saying that if I am going to resolve the issue in the South China Sea, I need to do it bilaterally. That means to say I have to talk to the Philippines bilaterally, I have to talk separately to Vietnam, I have to talk to Brunei separately, I have to talk to Malaysia separately. Diba? China, in fact, wanted to do that. But of course, ASEAN ayaw nila. Bakit? What do you think is the reason bakit ayaw ni ASEAN? Except for Thailand. Si Thailand, okay lang sa kanya ang bilateral. Why? Because there will be, as mentioned by Carla earlier on, there will be an asymmetry in the negotiation. You're talking to China, maliit ka lang, okay? Kakainin kang buhay ni China, right? So ASEAN as a whole wanted to move as one. But the problem is they did not be able to come up with a consensus. Okay? So although originally it was a binding code of conduct which was considered to be the primary goal of the ASEAN Declaration, as I was saying, after 5 years of negotiation, they were just able to come up with a political document which they called the Declaration of Conduct of Parties, which was signed in Phnom Penh in Cambodia in the year 2002. Diba? So ASEAN foreign minister expressed their concern over the situation in the South China Sea, and through a joint communique in Cambodia in 2002, they were able to come up with the Declaration of Conduct in the South China Sea. Now, ano ang binabaka ngayon ng ASEAN? Na magkaroon ng guidelines for the concrete implementation of the Declaration of Conduct. The first meeting on regarding the guidelines on the Declaration of Conduct was in fact hosted by China in Hainan Island. But after a series of meetings with regard to establishing and implementing guidelines, wala pa silang nabubuo ngayon. Ano ang pinakamalaking blow dito sa sitwasyon na ito? That took place in Cambodia. They were not able to come up with a joint communique in 45 years. Remember that Cambodia was the last ASEAN member state to be admitted. And yet, they make again another historical move when they block, okay, the passage of a joint communique regarding the issue of the South China Sea. Naalala niyo yung issue na yon? That the Secretary of Foreign Affairs was allegedly pinutulan ng mikropono para hindi marinig ang sinasabi niya. You know, that is how, you know, the power play basically comes into the topic of the South China Sea. Now, these are the instruments that we are using. Again, we have the UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas. But then again, who enforced the UNCLOS? Right? So, amidst all these efforts, ano yung posibleng implication sa Philippine security policy? Let's move on para matapos implication for Philippine security policies. Number one, legal arbitration by bringing the issue to ICJ, International Court of Justice, or the International Tribunal on the Law of the Seas. This is exactly what we've been doing, right? We have exhausted all our diplomatic, our political means to resolve the issue. And since to no avail, we decided to bring the issue unilaterally to ITLOS, right? Now, the justification was that, would the ITLOS resolve the issue? What do you think? No, right? The ITLOS could just do as much as it can. The ITLOS could say, okay, we are going to award this disputed territory to the Philippines. Assuming for the sake of discussion. Sabihin ng ITLOS, okay, sa Pilipinas na yung disputed territory na yan. Okay? The problem is, susundin ba siya ng China? No, precisely because ITLOS has no enforcement mechanism. Right? Pero anong sinasabi ng Philippines? Bakit ginawa natin to? What, does it make a sense? Hindi naman pala susundin ng China. Bakit pa natin itinala sa ITLOS? Diba? Ang sinasabi ng Philippines dito is that we're bringing this to ITLOS so that the entire world would know who really owns this disputed territory. And if the world knows who legitimately owns this territory, then it basically depends upon the international community to pressure China. Well, kung mangyari yun. Diba? The second implication is that support for the implementation of guidelines on the Code of Conduct of the South China Sea Common. Hindi tayo nakapag-come up ng joint communique in Cambodia. And how do you expect to come up with the guidelines? So this is really so difficult for ASEAN. That's why sinasabi natin, ASEAN is an opportunistic organization. We are highly diversified. We could not come up with an agreement precisely because ASEAN is composed of a highly diversified state. Okay? Rely on ASEAN for peaceful resolution of territorial disputes? I doubt. We're not talking about resolution here. Maybe management, right? We're talking about a management of the territorial disputes. But for you to expect a resolution, no way. Another, joint exploration and exploitation of resource. Sabi nila, okay fine, hindi tayo magka-agree kung sino talagang may-ari. Ang gawin na lang natin, sabay-sabay tayo mag-exploit at mag-explore. Bakit mag-exploit? Of course, hindi mo lang hahanapin siya. Ano naman gagawin mo pag nahanap mo na siya? Of course, you have to exploit it. Right? So, would it basically resolve the tension? No. Ang sasabihin natin, okay, fine, we could engage in that particular activity, but then again, as the issue of who really owns this territory would not be answered by this particular tactic. Right? Second, improve military capability for securing territorial claims. Well, we recently bought another Hamilton-class cutter, the PRP, Ramon Alcaraz, right? But try to compare it with Shilang and all other sophisticated armaments of China. We're no match, right? That's why, ang sinasabi natin ditong internal or external balancing, if we cannot do internal balancing because we're not militarily capable, then let's go to China. I mean to say, let's go to the United States. And as correctly pointed out by Carla earlier on, support military presence in the region as a form of leverage. So yun ang pinaka-available means sa atin. Kumapit tayo kay the United States. Diba? As a form of leverage. The point is, ano yung point of convergence ng interest ng United States sa Philippines? Hindi natin alam. Tama, sabi ni Carla. We don't know. Ang interest ba ng United States is protektahan ang interest ng Pilipinas over the South China Sea? I don't know. Right? So really, we could not come up with a complete policy to resolve the issue, neither to manage the issue. Right? So, this is quite important that we know the fact on this particular tension because it is important that we know what approach to take in order to resolve the issue amicably and peacefully. Right? Ang problema sa South China Sea is so complicated. It has three dimensions. Ang South China Sea issue is, ang pinag-aaway nyo lang dan hindi territory. Number one, if you talk about the South China Sea issue, you're dealing with territorial disputes. Second, freedom of navigation, meaning to say, karapatang makadaan doon sa South China Sea. And third, marine security. right? So these are the three dimensions of the South China Sea issue. And as of now, ASEAN has been late in trying to resolve the issue in the South China Sea. Okay? So thank you very much for your attention.
That was very, open-minded. Marami yung natutunan, guys. Nagulat kayo na ang US, mamaya yun na tanong. Okay, but before that, so kapag mag-question tayo mamaya sa open forum, first muna kay Ma'am Carl, tapos kay Sir. Bali, unay mo na yung unang topic. Sabay na, Sir. Sabay-sabay na daw. So mamaya pa po yung open forum. So before the open forum,
another icebreaker for this forum. May we call another student from 3LG, Mr. Charles Palomar, to give us a question of something. A big hand to him.
Sumama ko yung raya. Kakanta lang.